Thank you. It's really an honor to be here with you in such a beautiful place too. Thank you for having me. So I'm going to give this talk really in two parts. Some of you, the first part may be rather familiar. I'm going to really try to make sure that when I use the word mentalizing or mentalization, that the same idea lights up in your mind as lights up in my mind. So the first part of this talk is really to try to make sure that we have a common understanding of this word, this process. And later this afternoon, I will talk more about how we apply mentalizing, not just in the dyadic relationship between me as a therapist and my patient, but much more systemically as a team that mentalizes each other and a team that mentalizes the other teams and other professionals in a wider professional network that nearly always the clients, the patients that I work with are involved with the police, with education services, with physical health, social services, safeguarding services. And this is often a complicating factor for these difficult, challenging young people that I work with. So the first part of my talk is really about the developmental theory and the application of this theory of mentalizing in a therapeutic context. So I'm going to try to say something about what is mentalizing. I'll try to say something about where it comes from, both neurodevelopmentally, but also in terms of the developing relationships which a child grows up in. I'm certainly going to try to keep telling you why this matters, why this is an important function. And at the end of the talk, I will just begin to give some ideas about how we put this into use as a therapeutic stance, a way of keeping my balance in the therapeutic work and some of the applications. So in English, we have a word, a spoiler, which is normally told in relation to a film or a book when I tell you the ending before you have read the book or seen the film, and it's a very bad thing to do, but I need to give you a spoiler. This is a quote from Peter Fonagy. I like this quote. He likes this quote. This is the least novel idea or practice imaginable. There's nothing new in mentalizing. And there's a serious point to this, because I think that although we like and aspire to therapies being scientific and science and evidence-based, we are all victims of fashion. And mentalizing is very in fashion at the moment, and one should be careful of fashions. They come and they go. Mentalizing is, if you like, a common pathway that we think explains how many different effective therapies come to exert their effectiveness. Psychoanalysts are very good at helping people to mentalize. So are cognitive behavior therapists. So are interpersonal therapists. So are systemic family therapists. They have found different pathways to achieve the same final common achievement, which is to have people get into a state of reflection and thought that then may enable them to change their behaviors. Just to prove that mentalizing is not new, here is Socrates. It's a wonderfully mentalizing statement. I am the wisest man alive, for at least I understand that I understand almost nothing. And this is mentalizing in two ways. It's this thinking about thinking, the metacognitive position. And it is also implicit in the idea of mentalizing is that we're not very good at doing this. There are limitations. And mentalizing has, I think, helped therapists, clinicians, to calm down their own expectations of what they should be able to do with their own minds and the minds of their patients. And in that sense, I think it's a helpful new thing. So, an important person in the UK, he was one of the people who really described this idea of the theory of mind in relation to the autistic spectrum disorders. He's a professor called Simon Baron-Cohen. And this is a lovely quotation that helps us think about what it would be like without mentalizing. He says, imagine what your world would be like if you were aware of physical things, but were blind to the existence of mental processes. Things like thoughts, beliefs, knowledge, desires, intentions, which for most of us are very obviously what underlies, what stands behind the behaviors that we see in the world. For most of us, we don't have to think about that. It's obvious. And in many ways, mentalizing is a kind of folk psychology. My grandmother knew nothing of psychology or therapy, but it made sense to her why her grandchild would do something on the basis that he had an idea in his mind about what he wanted. He had a belief about what his grandmother would say if he asked her for a cookie just before she served him his dinner. She was going to say no, so I stole the cookie. You know? Yeah. And my grandmother did not need a word like mentalizing, but she was mentalizing. So before I tell you the definition of mentalizing, let me first of all go to why this matters. I think this is some of the most exciting research happening that I'm aware of at the moment by particularly a group of Hungarian developmental psychologists, Gergely Csibra and György Gergely, and their team. And the two phrases that you will find in the literature are epistemic trust and this notion of a pedagogic stance. What they're looking at is this question of how, as human beings, have we evolved a brain and a mind that can selectively transmit learning that is, the phrase they use is cognitively opaque. What does that mean? It means that there is no sign on the door in Bregenz as to whether, when I meet somebody I know, I give them one kiss on one cheek or two kisses or maybe even three kisses. And I travel around Europe, and this is a terrible worry for an Englishman who is always vulnerable to being embarrassed and ashamed at Brexit and everything that we do wrong in this world. I won't mention Brexit again, but I am sorry. So many of the rules for living are not written, are not obvious, they are opaque. And we have to learn them, and we have to learn them from somebody we trust. And this is a massive problem for the human species, because there are people out there who will try to teach our young people very dangerous, very risky, very harmful things. And luckily we have evolved a system, as we understand it, that is like a radar, that is looking for the person to take information in from. Great teachers know this. Great therapists know this. Great parents know this. And unfortunately, some very evil people know this too. And helping people to learn about this, I think, is important. What is this mechanism? Well, let me imagine with you that there is a young person who has come to see me and who I want to help. Now, very often the young people I work with, it is like there is a door between me with my head filled with ideas of what might be helpful. And there is a door between me and the young person I want to help. Every way I try to offer my help, it seems to bounce off. I try to push harder, I try to bang at the door, it doesn't work. So what this research suggests, which is sort of obvious, but it's nice to have science to support us, is that this is not a trick of pushing harder at the door, of breaking the door down or finding a clever way around the door. That the experience of being understood is what opens that door. That as a therapist, I cannot help but imagine an idea in my mind about what it might be like to be this young person. And when the young person sees in my face, hears the words that come out, a picture that I'm painting of them as I see them, if they recognize, see that English word, recognize, if they recognize themselves in my own mind, in the way I show them, oh, that sounds awful. Oh, if they can believe you've seen me, that is what opens their mind to the possibility that if I can do that, if I can see you in a way that you feel, okay, you've understood, then you're interested, and you may trust that the knowledge in my mind may not be just things that I like, but it may be something that is valuable in the social world out there that you could trust. And this is this notion of epistemic trust that is so important. Epistemology is the study of how we come to know. So epistemic trust is this particular trust in the social value of what is in my head. Is it socially valuable, or is it just what I like? And this is judged automatically by the extent to which you, when you look at me, feel as though, experience me as though I understand you and your dilemma and your difficulties. So I'm saying that mentalizing is the key to this door, because that is how, if I can do this at all, I can do it. I'm not going to go into this research in great detail, but I refer you to a beautiful paper by Egyed and Gergely and Chibra, where they've looked at this with young children, and they show them two toys, and they get workers to look at these toys and show delight and interest in one and horrible in the other. And they have different conditions, one in which, first of all, I take interest in you. Oh, hello, what's going on? And I'm really create a relationship. The other condition, I'm just not interested in you. I show you I like that toy, I don't like that toy. Under those conditions, you will decide and communicate in very different ways whether you think this is a nice toy and that's a nasty toy. And this is a critical element of, we think, what mentalizing was evolved to allow. We also know there's research that demonstrates that mentalizing in its earliest forms begins very early, before even, really, language has evolved. Some of the very key studies that began this thinking, again by George Gergely back in the 1990s, involved showing very young infants, below the age of 1 year, a series of films. So here is one of the films they showed. I'll show you the film now. I did not promise you War and Peace or some very elegant film. But there's another film. Here's another film. See which one you like better, because this is what they asked of the infants they showed this film. Here's the second film. Now, some of you who were extremely interested by these films will have noticed that in the film, the balls, they move in exactly the same way, both of those films. And the only difference is the presence or the absence of this wall in the middle. And they did many, many versions of the same idea, where they have a basic movement that one version of the film, it's sort of difficult to understand why this ball is doing this strange sort of dance. And the second version, where there's a wall, it sort of explains why the ball might jump. And I wonder how many of you in the room, when you looked at that, had some kind of story in your mind that may have, some of you are nodding, I can see, which is good. If you had no story in your mind, quick, talk to somebody. Some of you had a story in your mind, maybe about a mummy ball and a baby ball, and the mummy ball was, let me show you again so that you can see it. Yeah. Oh, quick, come to me. Oh, I'm coming. Oh, help, I can't. I'm going to try. Yes, I'm here. The important point about this is that in every version of these many different films that they give, almost very reliably, across many cultures, the infant prefers to keep looking at the film where the narrative, the story is more explicit, that where there is some more explanation of, if you like, an intention that is then prevented and then by some act of will is overcome. And that this is happening before this infant even really has much language. So this is a profound indication that we make sense of the world by attributing intentionality, in this case to a PowerPoint blob, circle. I don't want to disappoint you over there. This is not a mother or a child. It's just PowerPoint. But in our minds, these circles had intention. And that made sense. And that stories that make sense are attractive to us at, if you like, a brain level. So to make sense of this word mentalizing is an imaginative, note that word, imaginative brain activity. There are many other kinds of brain activity that are important, but mentalizing involves the imagination. And it takes place when we're making sense of very concrete things, behaviors, things that are done with hands or feet or words that are made. How do I make sense of that? And I may try in the darkness of you as an audience to make sense of your behavior. If one of you frowns at me and I can see, I will have to mentalize, have to make sense. Why are you frowning? If one of you does not laugh at one of my very weak English jokes, I will have to mentalize. Yeah? I will become slightly anxious. Yeah? But equally, I may, if you like, in real terms or in my imagination, hold a mirror up to myself. Ooh, am I going too slowly? I've got a lot of material to get through. I tend to talk more when I'm anxious. I must get on. So I may be mentalizing myself or I may be mentalizing you. It doesn't matter. But the point about mentalizing is that I do this by assuming that the actor the agent is mental, has a mind with thoughts, knowledge, intentions. And that is why this is a very basic idea. It is this wondering about each other's actions and behaviors on the basis of what do I think is the best way to make sense of that in terms of some distressing event that happened before, some context, some internal stress that might be helping you to or driving you to behave in the way that you are. So it's a very basic idea, but slippery. In terms of our brains, we know that from very early in life, at birth, the limbic system, right in the heart of the brain, particularly the amygdala, the hypothalamus, is really active from birth. It can deal with creating these primary emotions to do with protecting life, really. Very basic, fury, kind of happiness. And that really towards the end of, in England, the primary education, about the age of 11, 12, the beginnings of adolescence. At the beginnings of adolescence, another kind of modular part of the brain, mainly in the temporal areas, which is connected to memory and stories, becomes active, matures. And this part of the brain in the temporal thing is like a radar. It has some stories about how should people behave in specific contexts. So right now, you would expect me to behave sort of as I am. I'm talking to you in a reasonably sensible way. If I began to hop on one leg and maybe to sing or to undress myself, very quickly you would become alarmed. Even the idea is alarming. And your affective center, that amygdala, would become aroused. And you would begin to think, well, we could run away, or there's more of you, you could overpower me, you could do something to contain this dangerous Englishman. And this is the dilemma for the adolescent, because they have this powerful engine, the amygdala, the limbic system. They have this, if you like, the accelerator pedal, the kind of monitoring system for is what's going on all right. In English, young people would say, is it cool or not cool? They have this, and they know that it matters. But what they don't have is the final piece of this puzzle, which is the prefrontal cortex, which, if you like, is the kind of ooh, let's just slow down, stop. When this man put this idea of him jumping around on stage and undoing buttons, it was just a thought experiment. He wasn't really going to do it. It's okay. If he starts doing that, then we'll leave. But it's okay. And you have this prefrontal cortex. None of you ran away. Thankfully. So this is the dilemma for young people, for adolescents, that the prefrontal cortex really only reaches neurodevelopmental maturity around 22, 23, 24 years. Every year that the neuroscientists go on, they push this further and further forwards. And this is a dilemma, because the prefrontal cortex is what allows us to hesitate, to kind of wonder, to weigh things up. It's an executive function. And it's different from that amygdala limbic system that drives action and certainty and is fast. So how do we learn to use this brain, this part of the brain, this prefrontal cortex? Because mentalizing is not just about the brain. And this is why it's become, I think, an interesting way of making sense. It's related to attachment and relationships. In fact, it's all about attachment and relationships. And just as the mother incubates the fetus inside of the uterus, after the baby is born, we as carers incubate the mind of the baby in our own minds. There is very similar to what Wilfred Bion talked about when he wrote about container and contained. It's another way of saying the same thing. So these are two photographs supplied to me by colleagues of mine that I work with. On the left is a nurse that I work with and her baby son. It was always her favorite photograph from those years of his infancy. And on the right is one of the nurses I work with being held in the arms of her father. Again, this has always been one of her favorite photographs. And they brought them to me and showed me after I'd talked about the process that enables mentalizing to develop. Because what we talk about is this idea of mirroring. Many people understand this now. It's not a new idea. But it is this idea that something about the interaction between the parent and the child happens, where the parent, without thinking about it, mirrors the interest or the distress or the worry or the uncertainty, shows back what they imagine might be in the mind of the child. And that it's something about that that enables the child to see themselves. That we don't develop our ideas of self by just thinking ourselves into existence. We develop our ideas of self by finding ourself in the mind of a trusted other. And the key word in the research here is a word called marking. To mark. We talk about marked mirroring. Here are two young people who are distressed. The last two photographs, these were happy babies, broadly speaking. But here is a baby who's maybe kind of going, ah, ah, and you see a parent do something very subtle, complex. They don't just mirror. That would be the parent going, ah! Not good. Yeah? They don't do that. They do this. They go, oh, yeah, oh, dear, what's going on? Oh, you're frightened. Yeah? So they mirror the expression, you are an angry baby, oh dear. But they talk in this sing-song voice. We call it motherese in research. They make sure there's a lot of eye contact. They try to create reciprocity to and fro. They try to get some kind of, if you like, active communication going. And they also provide, if you like, other forms of care, the way they hold the baby, the way they soothe the baby, that shows them that this is not me being angry with you. This is like Magritte and that lovely picture, ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe. This is a picture of a pipe. Yeah? And it's the same that the parent is doing in this activity. They're saying, this is not me being angry with you. This is me showing you what I think, what I imagine is happening in your mind at the moment. And as far as they get that right, and there is a fit, a contingency, then there is a chance that the baby goes, oh, yeah, I recognize that. And they become curious. So they, bit by bit, every 5 minutes, an attuned parent will do this. We'll show them, we'll put a sort of frame around their mirroring that shows them, this is what I think is happening for you at the moment. And if you get every few minutes a representation of what this other trusted mind is seeing, you start to build a sense of yourself. So it's not Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. It's my mother thinks I think, therefore I am. Yeah? And it's that relational basis of our identity that is critical. So we have this idea of mentalizing. Let's just think quickly, what does it look like when somebody is active in their prefrontal cortex, when they are doing this thing, this activity called mentalizing? Because there are many other ways that I think and use my brain apart from mentalizing. Thank goodness. Life would be awful if all I ever did was mentalize. It's terrible. You don't want to mentalize your lover when you look into his or her eyes over a table. You just want to be, You want to, oh, what's going on? No. You just be. Yeah? But mentalizing is critically important when things go wrong. So what does it look like? Well, some people in this world like cats and some people like dogs. And compared to dogs, cats, they just can't mentalize. Sorry. I'm really sorry. Dogs actually are the highest mentalizers after humans, probably higher mentalizing than the higher primates. I'm sure cats do a little bit of mentalizing. No, they don't. Even dogs are not very good at mentalizing. They pretend. But people who are mentalizing demonstrate curiosity. Mentalizing is a state of being curious about why did I do, why did I say that? What's going on? It's a wish, an enthusiasm to find out. People who are mentalizing are good at not knowing. Mentalizing is the absolute opposite of mind reading. If you know what is in somebody else's mind, you can be sure you are not mentalizing. Yeah? If you know what's in somebody else's mind, you are not mentalizing. You're in a different state of mind, a state of certainty. That is not mentalizing. Mentalizing is the active effort to uncover, to create an imagined model that has some fit with the other person's mind. So minds are opaque. We can't see into them. And this is a good motto for a therapist, particularly with young people. For me to know a young person's mind is very unhelpful. People who are mentalizing are aware that emotion has an impact. People who are mentalizing are able to create and hold a story about how you and I came to be here that is reasonably coherent. And people who are mentalizing can demonstrate humor. Humor is a beautiful illustration of mentalizing. You can't really mentalize, can't really have humor without mentalizing. Most comedy is the comedy of errors, as Shakespeare put it. That humans misunderstand each other, and most comedy is that. When we laugh, when we make the ha-ha-ha noise together, it's a signal that our brains and our bodies have evolved. It's a signal that says just at the moment, as we laugh about the same thing, we know our minds are in the same place. So it's a very key element to say we are, if you like, understanding each other. There's lots of clever ways to explain mentalizing. Seeing ourselves from the outside and others from the inside. But my favorite is the second of these definitions. Understanding, misunderstanding. Because inside the definition of mentalizing is that we are not very good at doing it. So I want to quickly kind of move past these rather obvious points that I've made already to this point. To say that we've evolved a brain and a mind that by design only allows mentalizing under conditions of relative calm. Why? Well, if right now a tiger came in through the back door and began to walk towards me, maybe with some saliva coming from its teeth, of what survival value is it to me to mentalize that tiger, to wonder, I wonder what it's like in your tigery mind that would make sense of why you're walking towards me? No. This has no survival value whatsoever. And we have designed a brain that can switch off mentalizing, which is slow and kind of deliberately deliberating, which can switch into certainty. I know this thing is dangerous. I know the important thing is for me to run away or to feed one of you to it or just to, yeah, sorry. I would lay my down. So our brains switch quickly and appropriately into different modes of thinking, to certainty to action. And one of the other ones that we certainly see in the world of therapy a lot is what we call the pretend mode, where we, if you like, imagine all kinds of things, not very helpful, tend to get eaten. And it's critical here to make sense of the fact that this happens to our patients. Of course it does. But do you know what? The greatest thing about mentalizing is the leveling in power that it enables me to create between my patients and I, because it happens to me too. And I'm not doing mentalizing work with a family or a young person if I don't lose my mentalizing at times in front of them and then show them how I can try to get it back. And if I think that I'm never going to lose my mentalizing, I'm kidding myself. You know, I am in pretend mode. So losing one's mentalizing as a worker is a constant risk, and we deny that at our own peril. When we think about this, I have to get this out now. It's the most exciting toy of my childhood. Probably after Brexit, it will become again the only exciting toy that we can afford. It's called a Weeble. And the motto in English was that Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down because they have some weight at the bottom of them. And Weebles, they were, it wobbled, but it didn't fall down. So the Weeble is a good metaphor for what that is. It's that self-writing capacity that mentalizing provides. It enables us to lose our mentalizing and then to get it back again. To mentalize you, but then to mentalize me. To mentalize the feeling in the room, to mentalize the cognitions. To think about behaviors, to think about now, what's happening, and to think about the past. To keep these things in, if you like, a dynamic balance. When I'm anxious and stressed, as I pointed out before, I can fall off that balance into certainty. The person who is pointing at me like this and going, "You're a dangerous fool," is probably not mentalizing me. Yeah? He's very certain in his mind that the idea about me that's in his mind is not just an idea about me, it is me. That is why we call this psychic equivalence. If we kind of fall into that thing, that's one possibility. Very often, in a few seconds after that, we might fall off in a different direction, which is into what we call the teleological mode of thinking. Another way of thinking, which is very useful. If there's a tiger, the fix, the solution, is not to wonder about the tiger, it is to run away. Yeah? If somebody is about to fall out of a window, my solution as a therapist is not to think about how it might feel for them to be falling out of the window. It is to grab them and to pull them back. Yeah? So there are times when quick fix is absolutely necessary, and there are many times for our patients where quick fix is when I see blood, when I feel pain, it will be different, and that's better than how I feel now. When I've drunk a bottle of vodka, I'll feel different. That is a solution. It's a way of getting out of this terrible pain. When I've taken my medicine as an overdose, or, as a therapist, the only solution I can think of is put some medicine in you. Now, sometimes medicine is really helpful. Don't get me wrong. But sometimes the medicine treats my anxiety rather than the patient. Punishment is a good example, often, of a teleological response to overwhelming distress. And as workers, we need to be careful. We can become teleological. We can get into this psychic equivalence. Perhaps not quite as easily as our patients, but we certainly can. And if you cannot reflect on those elements of your own practice, I recommend you do, because I'm sure we all do. And the final one, I think, is the chosen form of non-mentalizing that we fall into as therapists. We call it the pretend mode. It's where I fall in love with these things coming out of my mouth, the words, the ideas, and I become disconnected from you and me and what's happening now between us. I become, if you like, very clever without connecting to your lived experience here with me now. In England, we have a word called waffle. It's also a thing you can eat, but waffle, the way I use it, is just kind of words without content, or without connection. So ambit, which I'm going to talk about in the second part of my talk, is really using these mentalizing ideas, not just in the work that we do face-to-face with our clients, where it's very helpful and there's evidence and ways that we would do it. But ambit applies these same ideas, that actually we need to create teams that are more mentalizing of each other, because when somebody mentalizes me, I calm down. I start to mentalize again. And as a worker going particularly out into quite risky situations, I'm at risk of losing my mentalizing. So creating teams that are more mentalizing of each other, and creating teams that are purposefully more mentalizing towards the other teams in the wider network of professionals, of education, of police, of social services. That in my work, often colleagues will say, "Oh, I love working with the young people. I find the families that I work with inspiring, courageous. It's the other professionals. That's what drives me crazy. It's the systems. It's the madness of the police knocking this family's door down in the middle of the night, the social services wanting to take this child away when actually we could do more. It's those crazy things that other professionals do that haven't understood what I understand. That's what drives me crazy." So helping create systems that become more mentalizing of each other. That's what ambit is about. So I'm going to leave it there for now, and I'm being chased off the stage. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.